Good afternoon, children. Let me start the class for you. Yesterday we have completed the chapter 3rd, that is the chapter 3rd, the Delhi Sultans, and now we are going to continue with the 4th chapter, the Mughal Empire. Right? Mughal Empire. Let us begin this one with the Mughal Empire, 4th chapter. Right, ruling as large a territory as the Indian subcontinent with such a diversity of people and cultures was an extremely difficult task for any ruler to accomplish in the Middle Ages. So what happened? Many rulers were there and they were finding it difficult to rule during the Middle Ages. Why? Because there were lot of diversity of people were there. Hindus were there, Muslims were there, Christians were there. So lot of diversity of people were there and they were following different cultures here. Even though they were Hindus, there were Brahmana, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas. There were so many different types of people were there. Quite in contrast to their predecessors, the Mughals created an empire and accomplished who had hitherto seemed possible for only short periods of time. So, however, Mughals were able to establish their rule in India. From the later half of the 16th century, they started expanding their kingdom. So what happened? From the 16th century, they started expanding their kingdom from Agra and Delhi. So from Agra and Delhi, they slowly started expanding their kingdom. Let us see from till where they have expanded. Until in the 17th century, they controlled nearly all the of the subcontinent. Until they had reached the 17th century, they had conquered all the subcontinents. Let us see, they imposed structures of administration and ideas of governance that outlasted their rule. So what happened? They had accomplished a lot of things. Structures of administration were there and they had given the ideas of good governance. They were ruling in a good sense, right? So that only they were able to rule for the centuries. What happened? Leaving a political legacy that succeeding rulers of the subcontinent could not ignore. Today, the Prime Minister of India addresses the nation on Independence Day from the ramparts of Red Fort in Delhi, the residence of the Mughal emperors. You have seen in August 15th, what happens? The Prime Minister of India is hoisting our national flag, right? And what is there in that? Before that, the Red Fort was the place where the Mughal kings were ruling, or they were staying in that place. Right now, the the Prime Minister of India, what he does, he addresses the nation on the Independence Day. Right. Who were the Mughals? Let us see. Let us know how were they? Who were the Mughals? From where did they come? The Mughals were the descendants of two great lineages of rulers. From their mother's side, they were descendants of Genghis Khan, who died in 1227. So what happens? They were the descendants, means they were from the mother side of the Genghis Khan, the Mongol ruler who ruled over the parts of China and Central Asia. Means taur maniyaವರು ತಾಯಿ ಕಡೆ ಅಂತ ಬಂದಿದ್ದವರು. Who was he? He was the Genghis Khan, right? He was which ruler? Mongol ruler, and he has ruled over some parts of China also and Central Asia also. From their father's side, they were the successors of Timur, died in 1404, the ruler of Iran, Iraq and modern day Turkey. So some were the successors. From the father's side, it was Timur, who died in the year 1404, the ruler of Iran, Iraq and modern day Turkey. However, the Mughals did not like to be called as Mughal or Mongol. The Mughals did not like themselves to be called as Mughal or the Mongol. This was because Genghis Khan memory was associated with the massacre of innumerable people. So Genghis Khan was responsible for death of the so many people, massive killing of the people. So for that sake, they were not ready to, the successors were not ready to be called by the Mughal or the Mongol. It was linked with the Uzbeks, their Mongol competitors. On the other hand, the Mughals were were proud of their Timurid ancestry, not least of all because their great ancestor had captured Delhi in 1398. So they were proud of their Timurid ancestry, and they had this because he had captured the Delhi in 1398. They celebrated their genealogy pictorially, each ruler getting a picture made of Timur and himself. Take a look at figure 2, which is somewhat like a group photograph. Here you can see figure 2. Here you can see this is the figure 1 of the Red Fort, where our Prime Minister addresses the nation during Independence Day. And here you can see here you can see figure 2. Right, here you can see all the people are sitting. This is called a group photograph, right? It is of the Timur here in the middle. Mughal military campaigns, you can see how was the Mughal military campaigns in those days. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, 1526-1530, succeeded to the throne of Farangana in 1494 when he was only 12 years old. So Babur became the first Sultan of Delhi when he was just 12 years old, 12 ವರ್ಷದ ಹುಡುಗರಿ, in the year 1494. He was forced to leave his ancestral throne due to the invasion of another Mongol group. So he was made to leave his ancestral throne because of the invasion of another Mughal group, the Uzbeks. So the Uzbeks made him to removed him from the ancestral throne. After years of wandering, he seized Kabul in 1504. So after the years of wandering, after wandering from here and there, he was able to get Kabul in 1504. In 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra. So after 1504 he became powerful, and later what he did in 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra once again. You can see his army and all here. Cannons were an important addition in 16th century warfare. Babur used them effectively in the first battle of Panipat. You can see these cannons, means elephants and the horses, they are ready, right? This one here, you can see the bombs and all, right? So, table 1 charts shows some of the major campaigns of the Mughals. Study it carefully and see if you notice any long-term patterns. You will notice, for example, that the Afghans were an immediate threat to the Mughal authority. So, who were the oppositions or who were the enemies of Mughals? They were the Afghans. Note the relationship between the Mughals and the Ahoms. See also chapter 7, the 6. See also chapter 8 and 10. And Mewar and Marwar. See also chapter 9. How was Humayun's relationship with Safavid Iran different from Akbar's? Did the annexation of Golconda and Bijapur in Aurangzeb's reign end hostilities in the Deccan? Let us see here. The gunpowder technology was brought to India for the warfare in the 14th century. Firearms were there. So these are the firearms. You can see in the photograph here. Firearms are there, were used for the first time in regions such as Gujarat, Malwa and Deccan, and was used by Babur in the early 16th century. He used the firearms in order to kill his enemies. So here you can see table 1, Mughal emperors, major campaigns and events. Babur 1526 to 1530. 1526 defeated Ibrahim Lodi and his Afghan supporters at Panipat. So what happened? Babur was able to take back his throne. He defeated Ibrahim Lodi and his Afghan supporters at the Battle of Panipat. 1527 defeated Rana Sanga Rajput rulers and allies at Khanua. So in 57 again he went for the war, and what he did, he defeated the Rajput rulers. This time he defeated the Rana Sanga rulers and allies. Allies means friends. Allies means meaning is friends. 1528 defeated the Rajputs at Chanderi. So he was able to defeat the Rajputs also, where at Chanderi, established control over Agra and Delhi before his death. So before his death he was able to control the Agra and Delhi. Next comes Babur ka beta Humayun, 1530, 1540, 1555 to 1556. Humayun divided his inheritance according to the will of his father. His brothers were each given a province. So what he did? Humayun divided his province according to his father's wish. He divided among each of the brothers. He divided the province and gave each brother a province. The ambitions of his brother Mirza Kamran weakened Humayun's cause against Afghan competitors. Sher Khan defeated Humayun at Chausa 1539 and Kanauj 1540, forcing him to flee to Iran. So what happened here? Humayun was Sher Khan defeated the Humayun at Chausa in 1539 and Kanauj in 1540 and forced him to move to the Iran. In Iran, Humayun received help from Safid Shah. He recaptured Delhi in 1555 but died the next year after an incident in this building. So what happened? He was in Iran. Humayun received the help from whom? From the Safavid Shah. And what happened? He recaptured Delhi in the year 1555 but died the next year after an accident in this building. When after an accident happened in this building, what happened? He was physically, he became weak and he was unable to come up from the injury. And what happened? He died in the year 1555. Akbar was 13 years old when he became the emperor. His reign can be divided into 3 periods. So Akbar, when he became the king, he was just 13 years old. 1556 to 1570, Akbar became independent of the regent Bairam Khan and other members of his domestic staff. Military campaigns were launched against the Suris and other Afghans against the neighboring kingdoms of Malwa and Gondwana, and to suppress the revolt of his half-brother Mirza Hakim and the Uzbeks. So what happened when Akbar became the king? He was not only the king but he had to face lot of enemies in neighboring his kingdom. Who were his enemies? One was against the Suris and again another was the Afghans. Not only Suris and Afghans, neighboring kingdoms of Malwa and Gondwana was there, and there was also to suppress the revolt of his half brother Mirza Hakim, and Uzbeks were also supporting the enemies. So in order to suppress all these people, he was in need of a big army. In 1568, the Sisodia capital of Chittor was seized, and in 1569 Ranthambore. So here you can see he was started capturing his neighboring cities. That is in 1568 Sisodia capital of Chittor, and he also seized the Ranthambore. In 1570-1585, military campaigns in Gujarat were followed by campaigns in the east of Bihar, Bengal and Orissa. These campaigns were complicated by 1579-1580 revolt in support of Mirza Hakim. So what happens? There were military campaigns were going on in Gujarat, and they were followed by the campaigns east in the Bihar, Bengal and Orissa. These campaigns were complicated by the revolt in support of the Mirza Hakim. In 1585-1605, expansion of Akbar's empire, campaigns were launched in the northwest. Kandahar was seized from the Safavids. Kashmir was annexed also Kabul. After the death of Mirza Hakim, campaigns in the Deccan started, and Berar, Khandesh and parts of Ahmednagar were annexed. So these are all the parts which were taken by the Akbar's empire. Which were they? They were first Akbar's campaigns were launched in the northwest, Kandahar, Kandahar was seized from Safavids, Kashmir was annexed, Kabul, and the death of Mirza Hakim. We saw that campaigns in the Deccan started and Berar also started. Khandesh and parts of Ahmednagar were all annexed. These were all the areas which were taken over by the Akbar. Now let us see now next Jahangir 1605 to 1607. Military campaign started by Akbar continued. So he started what? He started the military campaigns. Military campaigns means I told you he was having lot of fight. He was having the lot of threat from his neighboring kingdoms, also from the Afghans, also from the Mongols. So what happened? He was always making his strong military army. So he started so many military campaigns. The Sisodia ruler of Mewar, Amar Singh, accepted Mughal service. Less successful campaigns against the Sikhs, the Ahams and Ahmednagar followed. So what happened? The Sisodia ruler of Mewar, Amar Singh, accepted the Mughal service. They came under, they surrendered themselves before the Mughal. Less successful campaigns against the Sikhs. The Sikhs also surrendered. The Ahams and Ahmednagar followed. Prince Khurram, the future emperor Shah Jahan, rebelled in the last years of his reign. The efforts of Nur Jahan, Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. So what happens? Prince Khurram, the future emperor of Shah Jahan, rebelled in the last years of his reign. The efforts of the Nur Jahan, Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. It did not become successful. Now next comes the Shah Jahan 1627-1658. Here you can see Mughal campaigns continued in the Deccan under the Shah Jahan. The Afghan noble Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled and was defeated. You see, always the Mughals were having the threats from the Afghans and the Mongol rulers and some of the neighboring kingdoms. So here you can see the campaigns were launched against Ahmednagar. The Bundelas were defeated and the Orkha was seized. In the northwest, the campaign to seize Balak from the Uzbeks was unsuccessful and Kandahar was lost to the Safidis. So these were also the enemies to them, who were the Uzbeks and the Safavids. In 1632, Ahmednagar was finally annexed and the Bijapur forces sued for peace. So they annexed, they not only got the Ahmednagar but they were able to take the Bijapur also. In 1657-58, there was a conflict over succession amongst the Shah Jahan's sons. Aurangzeb was victorious and his three brothers, including Dara Shubhok, were killed. So here what happened? Aurangzeb, who wanted to become the successor of the Shah Jahan, he killed whom? He killed his three brothers and he became the king. Shah Jahan was imprisoned for the rest of his life in Agra. You know the story, right? Shah Jahan, Mumtaz. You know that the Taj Mahal was constructed by whom? By the Shah Jahan. So Shah Jahan, what happened? After he became old, his son Aurangzeb rebelled against him only. He killed his three brothers and he sent his father to the jail. Not only jail, for rest of his life he was made to live in Agra only. He was imprisoned in the Agra. Aurangzeb 1658-1707. In the northeast, the Ahams were defeated in 1663 but rebelled against the 1680s. Campaigns in the northwest against the Yusufzal and the sultans were temporarily successful. Here you can see Aurangzeb was also a strong, powerful ruler. He was able to conquer all the northeast. The Ahams, means the Afghans, were defeated in the 1663 and they also rebelled in the 1680s. And the Sikhs were temporarily successful. The Sikhs became temporarily successful against the Aurangzeb, but later on Aurangzeb conquered them also. Mughal intervention in the Marwar led to their rebellion. So when they intervened in the succession and internal policies of the Rathor of the Rajputs, Maratha chief Rathors of the Rajputs, Marwar led to their rebellion. Here what happened? The Rajputs became the enemies for the Mughals because they had intervened in the succession of the Rathor of the Rajputs. Right. Campaigns against the Maratha chieftain Shivaji were initially successful, but Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji, who escaped from Agra, declared himself an independent king and resumed his campaigns against the Mughals. So Aurangzeb had wars between the Afghans and Ahams, as well as the Sikhs, as well as he was having the Sikhs, as well as he was having the wars with the Marathas. In that Marathas he had captured the Shivaji, whom he insulted, but Shivaji was able to escape from the Agra and declare himself as an independent king, and Mughals became the enemies of the Marathas also. Prince Akbar's rebelled against Aurangzeb and received support from the Marathas and the Deccan Sultanate. He finally fled to the Safed, Iran. After the Akbar's rebellion, Aurangzeb sent armies against the Deccan Sultanates. Bijapur was annexed in 1685 and Golconda in 1687. So when the Prince Akbar didn't keep quiet, he took the help of the Marathas and Deccan Sultanate, and he finally started the war with the Aurangzeb. That time he was made to run away to the Safed, that is Iran. After the Akbar's rebellion, Aurangzeb he sent the armies against the Delhi Sultan, Deccan Sultanates. Bijapur was annexed. Bijapur came under him in the year 1685 and Golconda in the year 1687. From 1698, Aurangzeb personally managed campaigns in the Deccan against the Marathas. So you know, for the Shivaji, who was the greatest or the biggest threat? It was the Aurangzeb. There was a continuous war. War itri yarige Marathas and the Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb also had to face the rebellion in the North India of the Sikhs, Jats and Satnamis. So here what happens, even the Sikhs were also against the Aurangzeb. So in the North India he was also had the enemies of the Sikhs, Jats and the Satnamis. In the northeast of the Ahams, in the Deccan of the Marathas, his death was followed by a succession conflict amongst his sons. So what happens, he was having the enmity with the northeast kings of the Ahams and also the Deccans of the Marathas. But what happened, his death was followed for the succession conflict amongst his sons. It is said that one of his son poisoned him and made him to die, right, because of the succession means they wanted to become king after the Aurangzeb. For that sake they had put the poison in his food and he was killed. It is a story, but don't know how much it is truth or not, but still there is a story that he was poisoned in the food, so that after his death the son can become his succession. Mughal traditions of succession. What was the Mughal traditions of successions? The Mughals did not believe in the rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited his father's estate. Instead, they followed the Mughal and Timurid custom of coparcenary inheritance, or a division of the inheritance amongst all the sons. Follow the highlighted passages in table 1 and note the evidence for rebellions by Mughal princes. Which do you think is a further division of inheritance, primogeniture or coparcenary? So here you can see the divisions. Here you are seeing here different places how they were ruled. Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal, some places were left. All these places were occupied by the Mughals. According to the Mughals and according to our Indian kings, the eldest son of the king used to become the next king, succession. But here in Mughals it was not like that. The provinces should be equally divided. If there are 4 sons, the provinces or the whatever the areas they have conquered, it should be equally divided among the 4 sons. If there were 3 sons, they should be equally divided among the 3. If there are 2 sons, then it should be equally divided among the 2. But because of that only, what we see here, there was a conflict between the kings. Right, here you can see that is called as co-parcenary inheritance. It is called as co-parcenary inheritance. Rather than ours, they followed the Mughal or Taimurid custom of co-parcenary inheritance, or a division of the inheritance amongst all the sons. Next one, Mughal relations with other rulers. We will see that. You will notice that the Mughal rulers campaigned constantly against the rulers who refused to accept their authority. The Mughals were involved with the wars with the kings who were not accepting their authority, who were not ready to accept their authority. With them, the Mughals were involved in a continuous war, and those who were accepting their authority, they were not indulging in war with them, but those who were not accepting their authority, they were involved in continuous war with them. But as the Mughals became powerful, many other rulers also joined them voluntarily. As Mughals went on becoming powerful, the other rulers, they joined voluntarily, means on their own they came and they took the support of the Mughal kings. The Rajputs are a good example of this. Yes, the Rajputs, they made the friendship with the Mughals. The Rajputs are a good example of this. Many of them married their daughters into Mughal families and received high positions, but many resisted as well. So many of the kings, what they did, they gave their daughters, they did their daughters' marriage into the Mughal families and received the high positions, but many of them were not ready to do it. They resisted them. Well, for example, Maharana Pratap Singh, right? He didn't manage, he didn't joined the hands with the Mughals. He had a continuous fight with the Mughals. You are seeing Jodha Akbar movie. In that, the Rajput, Jodha is a Rajput, but she gets married to the Mughals, right? The mother of Jahangir was a Kachavaha princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Amber, modern day Jaipur. The mother of Shah Jahan was a Rathore princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of the Marwar, Jodhpur. Here you can see so many Rajput rulers, they have given their daughters the marriage with the Mughal kings, and they have enjoyed very high positions in the society. The Sisodia Rajputs of Mewar refused to accept Mughal authority for a long time. So, the Sisodia of Rajputs of Mewar refused to accept the Mughal authority for a long time. Once they got defeated, however, they were honorably treated by the Mughals. They given their lands Watan back as assignments, Watan Jahagir. So, they were given back their Watans, means their lands were given back, and Jahagir means some revenue was collected from the lands. The careful balance between defeating but not humiliating their opponents enabled the Mughals to extend their influence over many kings and chieftains. They were not humiliating, Mughals were not humiliating the Rajput kings, but what they did, they used to show the respect to them, and because of their respect nature, because of their good nature, because of their not humiliating nature, what happened, many chieftains and kings had very good relations with the Mughals, but it was difficult to keep this balance all the time. Yes, sometimes it did not keep the balance. Look at the table 1 again. Note that Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji when he came to accept Mughal authority. What was the consequence of this insult? So what happened when Aurangzeb was the king of Delhi? That time Shivaji had come and he told that we will accept the Mughal authority. That time he insulted the Shivaji. So you have seen the consequence of the insult. Mansabadars and Jagirdars. Next comes the Mansabadars and Jagirdars. As the empire expanded to encompass different regions, the Mughals recruited diverse bodies of people. So Mughals were able to recruit diverse bodies of people. From a small nucleus of Turkish nobles, Turanis, they expanded to include Iranians. So who were included? There were Turkish nobles were also included, as well as the Iranians were also included, Indians, Muslims, Afghans, Rajputs, Marathas and other groups. Those who joined Mughal service were enrolled as Mansabdars. So all the people who have been included were all taken, who have all enrolled were called as the Mansabdars. They were, then there may be Turkish nobles, they may be the Iranians, they may be the Indian Muslims, they may be the Afghans, they may be the Rajputs, they may be the Marathas and other groups, but they were all who joined the service, Mughal service, their names were enrolled as the Mansabdars. The term Mansabdar refers to an individual who holds a mansab, meaning a position or a rank. So here the term Mansabdar refers to an individual. It refers to an individual who holds a mansab. Mansab means a position, who is holding a position or the rank in the military service. It was a grading system used by the Mughals to fix the rank, salary and military responsibilities. I told you, in those days who were working for the military, they were given the very high position and high ranks were there. High salary was paid to them because they were protecting the life of the people and they were giving the life for the king, right? For that sake they were given the high position in the society, high ranks in the society and paid with a very good salary. So let us see, rank and salary were determined by a numerical word value called zat. So there was a numerical value called zat. Now you are having no monetary value rupees. In that time it was a zat. Nobles with a zat of 5,000 were ranked higher than those of 1,000 in Akbar's reign. There were 29 Mansabdars with a rank of 5,000 zat by Aurangzeb's reign. The number of Mansabdars had increased to 79. So in Akbar reign it was 29 Mansabdars. In Aurangzeb reigns there were 79 Mansabdars. As would this have meant more expenditure for the state? Yes, it was a more expenditure for the state because they were getting a lot of salary. The higher the zat, the more prestigious was the noble's position in the court and the larger his salary. So the zat, the higher the zat, he was getting what? He was getting a high salary, more prestige was given and the noble's position in the court was also a big position and his salary was also a large salary. Now, Mansabdar's military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of savar or the cavalrymen. So, he has to maintain the cavalrymen, the person who are going by walking soldiers, that also he has to maintain. And the person who uses the horses and all, on the horses who are there, people for them training and all, that all has to be maintained by whom? By this Mansabdar. Mansabdar bought his cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their houses branded and then received money to pay them as salary. I told you they have to bring the horsemen also, they have to bring the men walking soldiers also, they have to bring, and all these soldiers they have to register here and they have to receive money to pay them as the salary. Mansabdar received their salaries as revenue assignments called jagirs. They were receiving the money as revenues. Their salary was as revenues assignments called it is called as the jagirs. Right now you call salary, in those times they were getting the jagirs, which were somewhat like iktas. But unlike muftis and most Mansabdars did not actually reside in or administer their jagirs. They only had rights to the revenue of their assignments, which was collected for them by their servants, while the Mansabdars themselves served in some part of the country. So here they were only collecting the assignments or the revenue, and there was for them by their servants, while the Mansabdars they themselves served in some parts of the country. In the Akbar's reign, these jagirs were carefully assessed so that their revenues were roughly equal to the salary of the mansabadar. So here jagirs were carefully assessed, means they were taken care of, and it was equal to the salary of the mansabadars. By Aurangzeb's reign, this was no longer the case, and the actual revenue collected was often less than the granted sum. See here. So whatever they were collecting, the sum, the amount from the farmers, it was less than the salary paid to these mansabadars. Then what is the use? You have to collect more revenue so that the king gets some profit. If he is giving more than that, then what is the use? There was a huge increase in the number of mansabadars, which meant a long wait before they received a jagir. So before they received a revenue, these mansabadars were getting a huge amount of salary. Jagir means revenue. Revenues were collected by whom? By the farmers, from the traders, from the artisans, from the craftsmen, like that. Aurangzeb was unable to control these developments in the last years of his reign, and the peasantry therefore suffered tremendously. So what happened? Jahangir was unable to control all these things of his reign. So what happened? He suffered tremendously during his last years. Farmers were not able to live peacefully in these areas, because what happened? The mansabadars were paid high, so he has to collect more amount of the revenue in order to pay the salary to whom? For the mansabadars. In Akbar's reign they were only 29, but what happened in Jahangir's reign? There were 79 in numbers. So who was paying them the salary? It is the king has to pay the salary. And how he used to pay the salary? From the jagirs which he collected from the farmers. The jagirs were collecting what? They were collecting the revenues from the farmers. But what happened in the Jahangir's rule? Whatever the revenue they were collecting, that was less than the salary that were paying to the mansabadars. So both farmers also suffered a lot, as well as the king also suffered a lot during the Jahangir's rule. Zabat and zamindars. The main source of income available to the Mughal rulers was tax on the produce of the peasantry. I have told you, the farmers, what they produce, the goods and services produced by them, they used to pay the taxes to the government. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites, that is the headman or the local chieftain. So to whom they were paying the taxes? They were paying the taxes to the headman, zamindars, or the local chieftains. They were paying the taxes. The Mughals used one term, zamindars, to describe all the intermediaries, whether they were of local headmen of villages or powerful chieftains. So they had used one word called the zamindars. Zamindar kelsa entry urin gaudun kelsa aina, zamindaran kelsa aina, to collect the taxes from whom? From the farmers. Raitra beladanta goods and services, they have to collect the taxes, right? And they have to pay it to the king. Akbar's revenue minister Todar Mal carried out a careful survey of crop yields, prices and areas cultivated for a 10-year period. So Todar Mal, he carried a careful survey of the crop yields and the prices and areas for how much period? 10 years period. 1570 to 1580. On the basis of this data, tax was fixed on each crop in cash. So whatever the crops they were growing, they had taken the survey of 10 years. Who? Todar Mal, who was the revenue minister during the Akbar's reign. He has collected the data, and according to that, he had fixed that for such a crop, wheat cropping, 500 rupees tax. Like that, he fixed for each crop a particular rate of tax. And how you have to pay tax? In the form of cash, you have to pay the tax. Each province was divided into revenue circles with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. This revenue system was known as Zabat. So what it included? it had included it that each province was divided into revenue circles. It was divided into revenue circle with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. ಒಂದೊಂದು ಕ್ರಾಪ್ಸಿಗೂ ಒಂದು ಏನೇನೈತ್ರಿ ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ ರೇಟ್ ಐತಿ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿಸ್ ರೆವೆನ್ಯೂ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ವಾಸ್ ನೋನ್ ಆಸ್ ದ ಜಬಾತ್. ಈ ರೆವೆನ್ಯೂ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಏನಂತ ಕರೆದ್ರಿ ಜಬಾತ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತಿದ್ರು. ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಪ್ರಿವಿಲೆಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ದೋಸ್ ಏರಿಯಾಸ್ ವೇರ್ ಮುಘಲ್ ಅಡ್ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಟರ್ಸ್ ಕುಡ್ ಸರ್ವೆ ದ ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕೀಪ್ ವೆರಿ ಕೇರ್ಫುಲ್ accounts. So where the Mughal administrators were able to survey the lands and keep the very careful accounts, in that area only it was made possible. What was made possible? Zabat. This was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. So in Gujarat and Bengal it was not possible. In some areas the zamindars exercised a great deal of power. The exploitation of Mughal administrators could drive them to rebellion. So what happened? The exploitation by the Mughal administrators could drive them to rebellion. They were made, in Gujarat and Bengal, they were not satisfied by the Mughal administration, so they became the rebellions. Sometimes zamindars and peasants for the same caste allied in rebelling against the Mughal authority. What happens? Sometimes zamindars and peasants of the same caste, they became the friends and they started the rebelling, means they started protesting against the Mughal authority. These peasants revolts challenged the stability of the Mughal empire from the end of the 17th century. So from the end of the 17th century, what happened? The challenges began for the Mughal empire. Let us see what were the challenges and all, because in the some parts like